Hello, welcome everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is the 78th week that we've had in a row. This is our 78th meeting. Welcome, especially to the new people who are joining us today. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator, as well as Dennis Speed and Dennis Small, who are the co-moderators for this forum. We obviously have a very important reason for creating this International Peace Coalition, which was to unite the international peace movement, which quite frankly has been dysfunctional and needs to come together. And we wanted to bring people of above their ideologies and through many different nations in order to accomplish true peace in the world. So to start us off today is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Please go ahead, Helga.
Well, let me greet all of you first, wherever you may be. Unfortunately, the strategic situation is characterized by a very strange discrepancy in the perception of reality, which seems to almost be like people are in two different universes, which have almost no connection with each other. On the side of the Russians, following the deployment of the ATACMS and the Storm Shadow missiles from the United States and Great Britain, we had the deployment of the new tactical missile, as Putin described it, the Oreshnik in Dnipro, a Ukrainian weapon factory, and according to Gilbert Doktorov, also the repair shop for the German tank Leopard, a product of the military firm Rheinmetall. So apparently, this, however, did not have any real impact, because despite the fact that this missile, Oreshnikov, was deployed, which Putin described at great lengths. This is a so-called tactical missile with speed of Mach 10, and it can reach every spot in Europe. So it should have sent a message that people wake up to the danger of the nuclear Damocles sword hanging over our head. But this was absolutely not the case, because then immediately following that, two more strikes occurred on Kursk and Bryansk, basically using again ATACMS and I think also Storm Shadow missiles. So, basically everything what one can conclude out of that is that the powers to be are trying to escalate the situation, obviously in such a way that, by January, you have a situation where even if Trump comes into the White House, the war has escalated to such an extent that it would be impossible for Trump to tone it down and step back. So we are in the most dangerous situation in world history ever, because, if the West is continuing to ignore that, we are on the verge of nuclear exchange, then, it could happen. It could happen very easily. Now, yesterday, Putin in Astana at the meeting of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the so-called CESTO, elaborated again in great detail what this Oreshnik missile is. It's basically a weapon which is, hypersonic. It cannot be intercepted. And he described that Russia altogether has 10 times the number of all NATO countries combined. And then he went through in great detail each category of missiles, describing each of them being superior to whatever the West has. So, naturally, this is being put in the West. The media are still saying, oh, this Oreshnik will not make a major significance, no big effect. But that, from everything we can figure out, is not the case at all. And what it basically means, I will describe shortly. Now, what is the difference between the Samad missile, which Putin had announced in 2018, which was this big change, the new style of weapon systems, which, at that time, was the first time there were these hypersonic missiles being able to fly at 20 Mach, and each basically having, I think, 12 independently targeting avant-garde missiles, so being MIRVed. And the difference is the following, that the Samad missile uses liquid fuel and therefore has to be silo-based, which means that, the location naturally is then known to whatever enemy exists. Naturally, it still is requiring a major explosive power, but because it's deep underground and in silos. But that Samad missile, which is generally called the Satan, is so powerful that one single such missile could destroy almost all of Great Britain. Now, the Oreshnik is only 10 Mach, and contrary to the Samad missile, it's solid fueled and therefore can be on mobile launchers, so it can, hide behind trees. It can be camouflaged in all kinds of ways. So there is a virtual impossibility to hit all of these missiles in any strike. And that practically means that the very idea that the West could launch a decapitation strike against the Russian leadership is absolutely out. Now, that means basically we are in a situation, where the West is continuing to play with fire and pretend this does not exist. Now, there will be, in all likelihood, a counterstrike. This is to be expected from Russia against this continuous deployment of the ATACMS and Shadow missile deployment of a couple of days ago. And again, Gilbert Doktorov, in a lengthy interview he had with Nima Alkorid, basically describes how he thinks, what is the likely target country, namely because Putin had said a while ago that they would hit the command centers, the places where the decision to launch these missiles, the decisions are being made, would be the target. Now, he ruled out Great Britain because they have nuclear weapons, and naturally this would escalate immediately into a nuclear war. He thinks that Romania, which has the US base for a lot of these deployments, the Aegis systems way back, is also not very probable, given the fact that there is now a relatively friendly government, friendly to Russia government in place. So he leaves Poland as the most likely option. Now, this is just a hypothesis, but I'm repeating that so that people get a sense of how close we are to an escalation which could go completely out of control. So it could also, basically be an attack on the command centers in Kiev, yeah. So that's basically where we are at, and we are on the verge of nuclear war, and the population in the West, for the most part, is absolutely not aware of it. There are a few experts who are talking about it, and some people in the peace movement are starting to get quite freaked out about the danger. But, the Western media and most of the Western politicians, especially the transatlantic hawks, they are playing with fire, and they're playing with the possible annihilation of civilization by poo-pooing these clear signs from the Russian side that, you know, for them the red line definitely has been reached. So, you know, I think that it makes it all the more urgent that we move to a completely different paradigm. And, you know, we have called for an international Schiller conference on the 7th and 8th of December. This will be an effort to put an alternative on the table. And, you know, as we said from the very beginning, we have to convince the European nations and even the United States to stop confrontation with the emerging new economic system of the BRICS, which is the global majority. And, you know, that if we don't make the jump away from confrontation into cooperation, we are looking at the abyss of the annihilation of the human civilization. And we have decided and discussed it already at the last IPC meeting that, you know, where are the issues of common interest where we could try to build bridges so that we can actually see that the problems of the world are such that it absolutely requires our international cooperation. And one of many, admittedly, but one very urgent such problem is the migrant issue. Trump has made clear, also through his appointments of his new cabinet, that he intends to build a wall between Mexico and the United States to basically fend off the migrants coming from Latin America, Central America. Well, that may function to a certain extent in keeping the migrants out and reporting most of them out, the illegal ones out, but it does not at all address the suffering and the plight of the migrants, and it leaves them in a absolute unbelievable violation of their human rights. Likewise, the people who are trying to come from Africa and Southwest Asia into Europe, where the EU has only found an absolute disgusting answer, namely to build up the Frontex paramilitary Coast Guard to push back these migrants and, you know, make it so a horrible example that hopefully it is a deterrent against many more coming, and making deals with the countries around the Mediterranean to build up refugee camps, which Pope Francis has called adequately concentration camps, because they are surrounded by barbed wire, NATO wire, and people cannot leave them generally once they're in. So we have proposed, therefore, a completely radically different approach to say Africa has 600 million people who have no electricity yet. So why we not put our efforts together, European nations and the BRICS countries and the United States, and go for a crash program to electrify Africa, and at the same time start the construction of certain game changer projects, so that, you know, like the Inga Dam in the Congo, and also the Transaqua project, which would basically supply the electricity for the industrialization of 12 or more countries in the heart of Africa. And it would really, you know, create an incentive for those people who are now risking their life trying to get to Europe and be drowning then in the Mediterranean, to stay home and have a perspective to build up their own countries and overcoming the poverty and underdevelopment by becoming middle-level income countries in the short term, and likewise do a similar approach, building infrastructure for Latin America, which now is eminently possible because of the initiation of the Shanghai port, the first deep water port in Latin America, which is supposed to be connected with the bi-oceanic railway, and that can be the artery for a whole new infrastructure program for the entire continent, and have an incentive for refugees to stay home and build up their countries instead. Now, we plan to, we produced in the meantime in a crash program a very powerful brochure, which we will hear something about shortly from Dennis. And we plan to use that, and I'm appealing to all of you participating in this IPC conference. Download this pamphlet, organize like you have never organized before to reach people who are concerned with refugee issues, churches, all kinds of social organizations, because this is the way to peace. And this kind of cooperation on solving the migrant question is just one of the many ways how we can really build a new paradigm and build a new security and development architecture, which has to have the approach that it actually addresses all the pressing issues like hunger, poverty, health crisis, all of these things which would be so easy to overcome if we can get a cooperation among the nations of this world and really move in what I call the age of the adulthood of mankind, where war as a means of conflict resolution is overcome forever. Because in the time of thermonuclear weapons, it should be clear to every rational person that the idea of solving problems by war, which has the included danger of using nuclear weapons and therefore ending all life on the planet, should be ruled out if we have any sense of survival at all. So I think that that is the immediate perspective ahead of us. I think we have to give people this perspective that, there is a way out, because right now what you see is people are really getting scared, people freaking out. In Germany, for example, there is such a thing called Operation Plan Germany, whereby all levels of society are supposed to prepare for the coming war with Russia. Industry is called upon to prepare. The railway is beefed up only in the direction of the west to the east, so that large numbers of troops can be transported to the Eastern Front. This is completely insane. This is the EU, the new EU Commission with von der Leyen are, they have now abandoned the issue of climate change, which was her stick in her first term of office. Now she intends to militarize the European Union completely, which is a losing proposition and just, will lead to the destruction of Europe if this is not stopped. People in Germany are being told they should get their basements and their garages fit for wartime conditions, as if this would help in the case of nuclear war. It's completely crazy, but it has the effect of scaring people to death and making them extremely culturally pessimistic. So when Scott Ritter called for worldwide demonstrations on December 7th, this was picked up by RT Germany, and there will be some demonstrations on the 7th in some locations, and we should obviously discuss what can be done in this respect to amplify that. In addition, and absolutely linked to our extremely important conference of the Schiller Institute that weekend, where we will have very, very top speakers, especially also from the Global South. So I think that is my first overview, and I think we should really try to get a breakout, because we are in mortal danger.
Thank you very much, Helga. I've included in the chat on Zoom where people can download that report. If you're not on the Zoom meeting, please go to the schillerinstitute.com website, and you can find it. It's one of the first items on the top of the website, and you can find the link to RSVP there as well. So thank you very much for that, Helga, for that opening. Okay, so next we're going to continue with a regular on the IPC, retired Colonel Richard Black, who is the former head of the U.S. Army Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon and a former Virginia state senator. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator Black.
Thank you, Anastasia. What I'd like to report on today is that on November the 27th, an important new front has opened up in the endless wars in the Middle East. Al-Qaeda in Syria, with probably assistance from Turkey, with guidance, I suspect, from the Central Intelligence Agency, has launched a major attack, which broke a ceasefire that took place in 2020 between what is Al-Qaeda in Syria and the legitimate Syrian government. They're sort of a conglomeration of organizations. The current name of Al-Qaeda in Syria is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Formerly, they went by the name of al-Nusra. Each time that people become aware that the United States is providing unwavering support to Al-Qaeda, the same group that brought down the Twin Towers and hit the Pentagon on 9/11, killing 3,000 Americans. Each time they begin to get that inkling that we're doing something very strange in Syria, the name changes to something a little more obscure, a little more difficult to pronounce. But even on the State Department's website, it's clear if you read carefully that this group Tahrir al-Sham is Al-Qaeda in Syria. And so what we have is in the war that took place, very bloody war in Syria, there was finally the Syrian army was victorious, and they bottled up the remnants of the terror army in one of their provinces, Idlib province. And there was a ceasefire that was brokered partly by Turkey, and we've had quiet on that front since 2020. But apparently, what's going on is that Al-Qaeda in Syria and its allies, which include a major component directed by the Turkish intelligence services, they have launched this attack to take advantage of the fact that Syria has been under attack by Israel. They're not a combatant, but Israel has long conducted attacks, aerial attacks on Syria, and they've ratcheted them up during the current hostilities. But so you have this large outbreak of the Syrian terrorists who were organized by the Central Intelligence Agency going back to 2011, and they now have taken over a number of towns in the vicinity of Aleppo. Now, Aleppo is the second biggest city in Syria. It is the industrial heartland of Syria, and it was captured by the terrorists during the Syrian war at one point, and it was looted by Turks who came in and just stripped the city of all of its great industrial factories and machinery, and they sent them back into Turkey, where all of those things were sold off around the world. Right now, Aleppo is firmly under the control of the Syrian government. I was on the front lines in Aleppo back in 2018, and looked out across the battlefield and until one of the generals pulled me back from a gap in the sandbags, and he was very concerned that if I lingered too long, a sniper might hit me. But in any event, we see this continuation of the expansion of warfare. I doubt seriously that the rebels in Idlib province could burst loose without the specific, explicit guidance of the Central Intelligence Agency. We found out from WikiLeaks many years ago that the Central Intelligence Agency had set up a series of major warehouse centers along the Turkish border with Syria for the purpose of funneling weapons to the terrorists who were attacking the legitimate Syrian government. And this was disclosed as formerly top secret Operation Timber Sycamore. And we didn't necessarily orchestrate all of the tactics and strategies and ideology used by the terrorists, but we knew what they were doing. And a part of what was going on was the great ISIS movement. Turkey was the closest ally and trading partner of ISIS, which was famous for mass beheadings of POWs, or slave markets that sold little girls to pedophiles, crucifixions, immolations, and organized mass rape. And so Turkey is always on the lookout for opportunities to seize territory from Syria, and they certainly are complicit in the current attacks. So we will see what happens. The Syrians are moving major forces up to counter the terrorists who are causing quite a bit of trouble up there. And of course, this provides an opportunity for Israel, which has long had its eyes on Syrian property. So we will see what develops, but there is no doubt that within the deep state, there are elements of the Central Intelligence Agency, of the Pentagon, that are looking for an expansion of the war and the creation of a new front in Syria to, again, undermine any efforts that the Trump administration might have to bring calm and peace to the world. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Colonel Richard Black. That's pretty upsetting, but thank you for your analysis and going through this for us here. So we'll continue with this discussion. We'll go to Ray McGovern, who's a former CIA analyst and co-founder of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Please go ahead, Mr. Ray McGovern.
Can I be heard?
Is he there?
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear.
Okay. As many of you know, and as many of my colleagues have said, intelligence analyst colleagues and also military specialists, the West is in denial. Mr. Putin has started in 2007 with a speech to Munich Security Conference, and then in 2016 to a group of Western journalists, 2018 during a State of the Nation address. We did a show and tell showing these new weapons that Helga referred to. And now he has demonstrated that they have been successful in developing a whole new genre of weapon, okay? New genre. It's equivalent to the liminal departure in 1945 with the arrival of the atomic bomb. I do not exaggerate. This has the power of the atomic bomb, but not the fallout. figuratively and literally. So what Putin has done now is revealed that he has these Oreshnik missiles. They cannot be defended against. They go at Mach 10. For those of you who don't remember, back in when I was young, Mach was the speed of sound, and if you had a fighter bomber that went that fast, you had something. Think about Mach 10. Putin has just described it as the equivalent of a meteorite striking the Earth. So he warned about that with the actual test fire of this experimental missile, and said, "Oh, it was successful. A successful test. They destroyed a whole factory that used to make missiles in Dnipro, in Russian, in central Ukraine." So then Putin figuratively said, "Now will you listen?" And these tone-deaf NATO people, in full denial, says, "No, we think you're bluffing. We don't take that seriously." Okay, and Putin had already said this works, and so we're putting it in serial production, and we have several other highly advanced weaponry that you couldn't even guess at. Okay, so there we stand now. Does Putin want to use nuclear weapons, or does he want to get involved in a nuclear exchange? The answer I give to that is absolutely not. Why? It's not necessary. His primary duty, as he sees it, is to protect the Russian people. The last thing you would want to do is to risk a nuclear or, even worse, a nuclear war. And so what's he saying? He's saying, look, this is becoming really, really dangerous. We're afraid that the Trump people, not the Trump people, but the Biden people on their way out of office might be tempted as a way of avoiding extreme humiliation in Ukraine. They might be tempted to use a nuclear weapon. In my view, that is largely why Putin revised the nuclear doctrine and made it very clear that if Russia is threatened in any substantial way, they have now the ability and the legal approval in this ukaz to do precisely that. So that's where we stand right now. What gives me the most concern is that Fyodor Lukyanov, who is a really bright young fellow, young comparatively speaking to me, who's a very close advisor to Putin, who's head of the research part of the Valdai conference and head of very other prestigious institutions in Russia. He said this. I said this 3 days ago. He said, look, what's really concerning is the lack of back-channel communications. We have no communications. We had them in Cuba. We were able to use them and avoid nuclear war. This time, they don't exist. We've been trying to get this thing out of a policy kind of public diplomacy sort of thing. It doesn't work, okay? Now, and he says, both countries, Russia as well as the United States, is feeling a lot more pressure to move beyond what they ordinarily would do if there was this safety valve of encrypted, as he says, encrypted back-channel communication. It doesn't exist. Wow. Now, did I sort of know that? No, because I thought that there had been an established channel between Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Belousov, his opposite member in the Kremlin, in the defense ministry, Minister of Defense in Russia. Nothing has been mentioned about that. Matter of fact, where's Waldo? Where's Austin? Where is he in all this? Just 2 months ago, on Friday the 13th of September, he was able to overrule Blinken and the other hotheads and tell the president, no, don't let Stormer and the others, don't let ATACMS and Storm Shadow hit deeper into Russia proper. So that went down on the 12th and the 13th of September. And here we are in November. What changed? I don't know what changed. I don't think the Russians know what changed. But, in these last, 6 weeks or so, 7 weeks we have before January 20th, the Russians are very concerned that no matter what they do, the rhetoric, of course, is not persuasive, but demonstrative ability to level, to turn to dust a big factory in Dnipro is still not enough. NATO talking about putting troops in Ukraine, or maybe giving Ukraine Tomahawk missiles, which exceed Storm Shadow or ATACMS in range. The only saving grace I see here is that NATO is divided. It's seriously divided. Hungary, Slovakia, Turkey, maybe even Italy won't go along with this craziness, okay? And that's a good sign. Scholz in Germany, and I think our focus should be on Germany. That's what's gonna, whatever happens in terms of the peace movement, it's gonna happen there. Scholz has refused to give permission, the kind of permission that the British and French were given to use U.S. technology in their Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles. He said, no, we made a decision months ago. We're not gonna give Taurus missiles to be used, or let the Ukrainians use them in Ukraine against Russia proper. I would just refer you, in case you've forgotten, that Luftwaffe generals, very, very high-ranking Luftwaffe generals, were intercepted talking about all this. This was back 3-4 months ago, if memory serves. And the bottom line was, look, when you brief the defense minister, make sure you know that this is not going to change the course of events in Ukraine. It will not change the trajectory. It will not have any success in preventing Russians from winning. Make sure you know that, and make sure you know, and this is a quote, that this is all political, okay? So even the Luftwaffe general staff knows this. And even the people talking to the New York Times and the Washington Post say in paragraph 13, officials acknowledge this is not going to change the course of the war. Well, hello, so why? Well, I don't know really why, and I think that Putin doesn't know really why either. So he's on tenterhooks for these next several months before June 20th. January 20th. Now, the other thing I want to adduce here is that Lukyanov and others are really smart guys, okay? He's got Dmitry Trenin. He's got all kinds of really good, experienced people who know not only Russian missilery, but know the U.S. political system. So he has some knowledgeable advisors. Biden does not. And lastly, if one compares this to the Cuban Missile Crisis, John F. Kennedy made a point of having former ambassador to the Soviet Union, Llewellyn Thompson, participate in every key meeting plotting the strategy as to how they would react to Khrushchev's putting offensive strike missiles in Cuba. Every single meeting, Llewellyn Thompson was there. He was ambassador to the Soviet Union before the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then he was reappointed after the Cuban Missile Crisis. So all I'm saying is there's no Llewellyn Thompson in Washington right now. And so the Russians are on full alert. I understand they have upped their alert status, although I can't confirm that with my own sources. So when my friends like Scott Ritter say, look, be worried, this is the worst situation since the Cuban Missile Crisis, I agree. I don't want anybody to think that my emphasis on Putin's sang-froid, his perspicaciousness, his statesmanship, for God's sake, that makes this any lesser of a threat. It's not. It's just how I think he sees his equities. It makes him more reluctant to rise to the bait. Last thing I'd say here is that North Korea plays in this calculus. I just learned this morning, Belousov, defense minister from Russia, where is he? He's in Pyongyang talking to the North Koreans. Now, what's the big deal there? The Russians and the North Koreans have had a really, really, really long relationship, right? Okay. They have a mutual defense treaty now. So when Putin was asked, what about those North Korean soldiers in Russia? I didn't deny that they were there, but he took advantage of the opportunity to say, well, we have this treaty, and if one country, that is either Russia or North Korea, is invaded by somebody else, then it's a duty, it's an obligation for the other to come to the aid of the second country. And after all, we've been invaded. The Ukrainians took it into their head to invade us in Kursk. So if there are North Korean soldiers there, well, hello, that's only natural. You would expect that in these circumstances. Now, I don't know if there are any North Koreans in Kursk, or there no doubt some training out in the Far East. But the other thing is that the South Koreans are really playing a really joint role here. They don't want the North Koreans to steal a march on all this, and they're very, very sensitive to how the incoming administration will look on South Korea if they make it easier for those opposed to Trump to intervene and influence things. Lastly, the North Koreans have had for at least 2 years and have tested a very sophisticated intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, given to them by Russia. This was a shock to everyone. The Russians call it the Topol-M. The Koreans call it Xiang-24, I think. In any case, it's not only almost the most sophisticated missile ICBM that the Russians have, it has all the bells and whistles. It has all the decoys. It can reach any spot in the United States, including Mar-a-Lago. Okay, it has that range, right? Most of all, take this to heart, folks. It's mobile. What does that mean? Well, as Helga alluded to in the beginning, when you have a mobile missile, you can't really be sure you know where it is. It's an incredible deterrent. And if they choose to use it, you don't know it's being used until it's fired, okay? So they have this mobile missile. Jake Sullivan was asked about this when Ted Postal published in a very, very well-respected scholarly journal. And what Jake Sullivan said, well, oh yeah, we know about those reports. Our intelligence people are looking into that. Now, did any of the slavish reporters in the White House press pool think to ask Jake Sullivan in the last 2 years whether he knows any more about this missile? No, they haven't. So there's denial, there's suppression of evidence, and the West, and the United States in particular, and Great Britain is not prepared for what might happen just in the next 6 or 7 weeks. So there's an alarm right there. I'd like to just tell you that when Lukyanov tells us that this is really precarious, that there is no encrypted back channel communication tie to allow people to do what we did in Cuba, that's big, okay? And so is Austin not able to talk to Belarusov anymore? I don't know, but I think it might be that that it would have been included in this, that Lukyanov would say, well, except for that one link we have, which has been useful in the past between Belarusov and Austin, we don't have any. But he didn't say that, so there's none. So let's just get on our knees and pray that there is sang-froid enough to prevent the Russians, as I see it, from rising to the bait and getting involved in something they really don't want to get involved in before the Trump administration comes in, and they can see the lay of the land then. I spoke longer than I intended to, but I hope some of what I said hits home and that you're better informed about how the Russians are looking at this thing than before. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Ray McGovern. That was very useful. I wanted to ask you if you had any time limitations today, just in terms of the discussion, so we can.
I will be tuned in, so I might not be visible, but I'll be tuned in for as long as you go. So if there are any questions that I might answer, please just call on me.
Wonderful. Okay, great. So what we'll do is we'll continue and then we'll come back. Okay.
Sure.
All right. Thank you again, Colonel Ray McGovern, for that. So next we're going to go to Carl Osgood, who some may recognize from the EIR. He's the Executive Intelligence Review Military Strategic Specialist. And if we have Carl Osgood on, please go ahead.
I'm here. Thank you, Anastasia. I think the title you gave me was a little bit ostentatious, but I'll do my best. I've actually been asked to do a couple of things, but I'd also like to address a little bit what Colonel Black was saying about Syria. But what I've been asked to do is discuss the actual Russian response to the ATACMS attacks on Kursk and Bryansk regions, which have already been mentioned. Because the Defense Ministry put out a statement yesterday, midday our time yesterday. This followed President Putin's remarks to the CSTO summit, where his press remarks to press afterwards, in which he was asked about the Russian retaliation, and he described it in a paragraph. But then after that, the Defense Ministry put out a statement with much more detail. They said there were like a series of attacks that the Russians carried out in response to these Ukrainian attacks using the ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles. Basically, they targeted HIMARS rocket launchers. The HIMARS, the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, that launcher is used to launch the ATACMS missiles. So the Russians actually were able to seek out and destroy a number of these launchers, as well as the transport loading vehicles, the vehicles that provide the reload missiles, in the Ukraine Sumy region, which is what borders Kursk and Bryansk regions. They also attacked, destroyed launchers for something called the Grom-2 experimental ballistic missile, which have not had a chance to look up, but also a launcher for Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missile launcher. That's what they said. Moreover, the strikes were delivered at deployment areas of specialists, including foreign ones, that ensured combat employment and maintenance of Western-made long-range weaponry. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because they said on the 25th of November, as a result of a missile strike at the main Directorate of Intelligence, and I understand that this was in Kharkov, not Kiev, up to 40 foreign specialists, mainly from the USA, were eliminated. So they're saying they actually killed Americans. What status, the details are not available yet on what status these Americans may have officially had or unofficially had, have not been acknowledged by the US that they were that deeply involved in the Ukrainian military operations. Secondly, there was another Russian strike using an Iskander missile at a temporary area of detachment of the armed forces of Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, which neutralized 72 personnel of uncrewed surface vehicle crews. Apparently, this is sea surface vehicles, like on the Black Sea. They don't say where this, I don't have where this strike was, but may have been Odessa, including 9 French instructors and technical specialists. So you have 40 Americans that they claim killed and 9 Frenchmen. So the suggestion there is, the implication there is that the NATO involvement is already pretty deep in the Ukrainian military operations. There was also on November 28th in the morning a combined strike of delivered at Ukrainian defense industry enterprises and power infrastructure. A combined strike means that they were involved both drones, attack drones, and missiles, cruise missiles probably most likely, but perhaps some ballistic weapons. But not a Oreshnik. If there had been another Oreshnik strike, they would have said so. So in total, over the last few days, the Russians say that they delivered 100 missiles of different types and 466 drones. These are Geran-2 drones, which are reported to be designed from Iran. They hit 17 crucial objects of Ukrainian defense industry. So that's the defense ministry description of what Putin had mentioned in his remarks to reporters in Astana on the day before. No, that was yesterday. I'm sorry. And then further, Putin was asked further about the Oreshnik strike, the Oreshnik missile, and this is where he emphasized, although the damage is minimal, the mere fact of their usage, of course, cannot. Oh no, he's referring to the ATACMS here, but this is what the Oreshnik was fired in response to initially. So he said, this is where he said that the impact that it's like firing a nuclear missile, except without the radiation. There's no fallout. There's no mushroom cloud. In fact, the warhead that was used in the Dnipro Petrov strike had no explosive content at all. No explosive warhead. It was all solid metal slugs, probably some exotic, very dense alloy that has not been described yet. And so the destruction of the target was caused solely by the kinetic impact of these slugs, which could probably penetrate 50 or 60 feet into the ground and cause tremendous shock waves in the ground when they impact. So any underground infrastructure would be totally destroyed by this. So that was that's one of the revolutionary qualities of this weapon that they used. Now, Helga referred to the downplaying, the poo-pooing of the Oreshnik by certain Western analysts. There was a story in Reuters just a couple of days ago, basically attempting to portray the Oreshnik as little more than a downsized ICBM, just shorter range, but otherwise operating the same way. And we already know how to intercept ICBMs, so this is not a threat at all. And they quoted a guy named Jeffrey Lewis, who is an analyst, director of I think it's called the Monterey Institute of International Studies or Security Studies. I forget the exact name, but he was quoted basically saying that this is not really so revolutionary, not a threat. We know how to intercept these, and so that's the game that's being played with this. It's to prevent the Russians from upsetting the NATO narrative of Russian aggression, and that we have to defeat Russia, and that there's really no talking to Putin, as Ray McGovern already alluded to. So that's the narrative, and they have to come up with explanations for the Oreshnik that go along with the narrative, but are in fact no more truthful than the narrative is. I think that's where I'll leave that. I do want to provide a little bit of background on what Colonel Black said about Syria. I think the main point to remember about Syria, aside from what he already said, was that in 2018, Donald Trump during his first administration, wanted to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria. And he actually had issued the orders. He made a point of making that the policy. And there was a complete revolt from both the Pentagon and the U.S. Senate, his best backers in the U.S. Senate, like Lindsey Graham, against that. James Mattis, who was the Secretary of Defense, resigned over the matter, but enough of the bureaucracy in the Pentagon remained obstructive so that the complete withdrawal never happened. The number of U.S. troops in Syria went from 2,500 to about 900. There are hints now that coming out of the Trump camp that maybe Trump will want to withdraw the rest of the U.S. troops from Syria. I think that ought to be considered given this attack that began on Wednesday morning. After the Israelis bombed 3 border crossings between Lebanon and Syria, just before the ceasefire in Lebanon went into effect. And of course, the Syrians, as Colonel Black said, the Israelis rather, have been bombing Syria, waging I forget the term they use, but they basically waging a kind of low-grade war against Syria for many years, supposedly to stop weapons flows from Iran passing through Syria to Hezbollah and Lebanon. But they have directly attacked Iranian figures in Syria as well, killing a number of senior Iranian officials as well. And I think the Hayat al-Sham, which has rebranded itself many times, but is still essentially Al-Qaeda, they claim to have killed an Iranian general in their attack on Aleppo also. I mean, there's more to say about that, but I think I'll leave that at that. So I'll pass it back to you, Anastasia.
Great. Thank you, Carl, for all of that, for going through that with us. And I think the title is very fitting that, that I was given of you. So we'll go with that. But I wanted to go to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, if she had any response to anyone who's gone so far in the discussion. We still do have Ray on as well.
I think we should discuss, and I would appreciate if all the experts on this panel would contribute, because, the denial of the officialdom of the West is really the most scary thing. It's almost, I mean, if you think what is the definition for insanity, it's a complete lack of connection to the real world. So by that definition, I think these people are really clinically crazy. And I think if you don't puncture that, then they will just continue. So I would like to pose this as a topic for discussion. Now, what more can we do other than what we are doing already with the IPC and the upcoming conference? So if people have some good ideas, I would welcome your expertise.
Yeah, Ray McGovern or Carl. Unfortunately, Colonel Black is not still on, but if any of you have a response. I also see President Ramatar on as well, which he's also welcome to join the discussion.
Okay, thanks so much for the good work that you've been doing all the time. I want to say first of all that I have total agreement with Helga's position about the development and linking development, economic development, and peace and the dangers to the world. But I believe at this point in time, at present, where we are, that the major danger to the world that we're facing and that is frightening has to do with the position of the collective West to have total hegemony over the world and to have military dominance over the world. The war in Ukraine, as you will all recall, began fundamentally when they were threatening Russia's security by getting Ukraine into NATO Russia saw that as a big no-no, and they saw that as an extreme attack on their own security, and to put the West in a position to blackmail them and to do whatever they want with them. And that is why they reacted so very strongly. And the situation in the Middle East has a similar kind of origin, where the demand is by Israelis to ethnic cleansing, to take over the all of Palestine, part of Lebanon, part of Syria. They already got part of Syria, and I think the immediate task is demanding equal security and justice. I think that is the two legs that we have to probably push on today. The whole question of security, equal security for all states, and also in order to have also justice for the Palestinian people. And that is where I think the crux of the matter is. I also wonder sometimes in my own thinking whether sometimes we are putting too much of stake on Trump. I mean, we don't know exactly what he will do, because we remember that he was the one in Syria, and I remember very clearly when he was asked what you're doing in Syria about moving out his troops from Syria. He said he's there for the oil, and he's taking the oil, and he continues to take the oil in Syria. So he has a kind of he has some inclination. We're seeing that he will probably want peace. He don't want this tension to go in that way. But he also has a domineering kind of outlook as well, that he wants to dominate the world. And I think the expert Ray and Colonel Black can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that under his previous presidency, that he was also dabbling with Al Qaeda in the Middle East and in Syria as well. I'm not 100% sure of that, but the very fact that he was in Syria, having the base in Syria, refusing to move and not moving the base in Syria, succumbing, as was said just now, to pressures from inside for not moving his base in Syria. I don't know how much persuasion he actually needed, or if part of his thinking is also linked to dominating and to raiding and to taking the people's oil, etc. in that regard. The other worry that I have is that the ceasefire that was reached, which of course we're happy about that in the sense that it is saving lives, that people in Lebanon, civilians in Lebanon, are not dying the way they were dying before. Although I heard this morning that Israel did bomb some areas in the area, but when I look at the agreements that have been reached to get the ceasefire, I think, in a way, while I probably understand the pressure that probably Hezbollah have been under to come to this kind of agreement, I think it is, my own view, it is more in favor of Israel and the United States than it is to the resistance movement, because how could they agree that the United States and France will guarantee this peace when they have shown their total bias about being on the side of Israel? And secondly, Netanyahu in his speech, I listened to his speech, I should try to listen it again, but I got the impression that he was saying to his people, I am going for this agreement because, one, I want to focus more on Iran, and secondly, Israel needs some time to build back their military force, that they want to get some time to rest their people and to get in more equipment in order to fight again. So we can see from all the experiences that we've had with every single tragic incident that occurred, they were always found a way to blame the other side, Hamas or Hezbollah, or they're hiding among civilians and all of that and killing people all the time. So I think that we got to probably re-examine that agreement. While, as I said, I am not there, and I would really appreciate the fact that the killing has been eased a little bit, although the killing in Gaza seems to have been intensifying. Um, it is clear that, to my mind, they feel that at any time that they can restart the war whenever they feel that they're ready for it. And this is not a real, genuine ceasefire. This is a ceasefire. And secondly, also, they're going to push the Hezbollah forces beyond the river, but Israel would be right up to their border. There's no buffer zone in Israel. There's a big buffer zone in Lebanon. And so all of that, I wonder sometimes if they got off a little bit scot-free. But as I said, I always qualify it by the fact that the people were suffering like hell, and they had the dominance in the air, but they were losing the war on the ground. It was very clear that they were losing the battle on the ground, and this probably gave them an opportunity to regroup themselves to continue the attack. And I want to think also whether the time has not come where we should be a little bit more frank about the role of the Arab states that surrounds Israel, surrounds Libya, Turkey playing a very, very double-edged game. At the one time, they make it a very positive statement, but we know that they have been the ones that were supplying oil to Israel all the time, with all the militant talk that they're having. So I think that maybe we should also focus some attention on the role of some of the Middle Eastern players, on what they are doing in order to have this domination and the injustice of what the Palestinian people are doing. So that's it. That will be my contribution for the time being. I think that our immediate focus should be on security, equal security for everyone, and justice for the Palestinian people, the right to have their own homeland. Those are, to my mind, some of the key, which also applies to some extent to what is happening in Syria. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, President Ramatar. If people don't know who President Ramatar is, he's the former president of Guyana. Thank you so much for joining us and saying what you said. I know that Dennis Speed had a response, which he wanted to communicate. Please go ahead, Dennis.
Well, this is really more for the consideration of everybody who would not have heard it, particularly the Americans who are still hung over from Thanksgiving and may therefore not know what Vladimir Putin had to say about the president-elect Donald Trump, something which will certainly become part of the discussion in the next 24 hours in this country. So this is from a Reuters press release. I'm only going to read an excerpt from it. Dateline yesterday. Russian President Vladimir Putin praised U.S. President-elect Donald Trump on Thursday as an experienced and intelligent politician, but said he did not believe Trump was safe after attempts on his life. Speaking to reporters in Kazakhstan after a summit, Putin said he had been shocked by the way the U.S. election campaign had unfolded. He cited, quote, and this is now Putin speaking, the absolutely uncivilized methods used to battle against Trump, up to and including an assassination attempt, and more than once. By the way, in my opinion, he is not safe now. He said, unfortunately, in the history of the United States, various incidents have happened. I think he, meaning Trump, is intelligent, and I hope he's cautious and understands this. Okay. He talked about the behavior toward attacking Trump's children. He said he found that, quote, revolting. And that's about it. But that was Putin directly on Trump. Now, of course, we have heard nothing from Russia. Putin, Trump, Russiagate, all that stuff. Suddenly, this has been done on Thanksgiving, I might add. So I don't know whether Ray would have known that or others. I just wanted to make sure that I inserted that so people are aware that that happened yesterday.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, Ray.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Dennis, and thank you especially, President Ramatar. I've been listening in, but I've had some domestic duties that took me away. Let me add, Dennis, to what you just said. If memory serves, and I read this late last night after too much turkey, Putin also said, Trump's a smart guy. He'll find a way, he'll find a solution to Ukraine. Huh? So, this may be flattery. This may be just kind of trying to evince a reaction, but he said it, okay? So Putin is giving mixed signals here. When asked a year ago what he prefers in a president of the United States, he immediately said, "Oh, predictability." I mean, that's a no-brainer. We need somebody who's predictable. Now, that's why he went on to say, "I favor Joe Biden," and later, I favor Kamala Harris. So what I'm saying here is that I don't think Putin knows what to expect. Okay, and the silence of Trump maybe can be explained and understood, but he's got lots of people that could be commenting what's going on now in a more sensible way than the administration, if indeed they feel different from the administration. So there is a theory that no, Trump is just as soon see it get worse before he comes in. It's not at all clear, in other words, to Putin whether Trump is going to be good or it's going to be bad. Now, last little footnote here, last time it was really bad, okay? There was a treaty. It was called the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that destroyed a whole class of medium and intermediate ballistic missiles. The idea was from Gorbachev in 1987. Reagan was persuaded this was a good idea. They destroyed them all, okay? Now, that was 1987. 2019, on his way out of office, who got out of that treaty? Trump. And that was a big mistake. As a matter of fact, this Oryezhnik missile would not have been permitted under that treaty. So what I'm saying here is that not only does Putin remember that, he said it. He made a point, and the Russians have made a point of saying, yeah, well, in 2019, Trump got out of this treaty. So it remains to be seen, and doesn't matter what I think. Putin can't be clear on what's going on there. Now, what else did I want to say? I think in answer to Helga's question before, Scott Ritter has thrown down the gauntlet to the Trump people. He said, look, you were elected on a peace platform, for God's sake, and now you won't say a word. Are you going to let this happen here in the last 6-7 weeks? And that's what we need to do in the United States. And I would add, and of course, Helga would know better than I, in Germany. It looks like the German government's going to fall apart in another month or two. There is increasing, as far as I could tell, citizen ferment having to do with being targeted with Russian missiles after we put in our intermediate forces missiles promised for next year or for 2000, for the year after next, okay? So to the degree we can spread the word and get around the mainstream media, I think the Germans are in worse shape than we are. I don't know how strong their alternative media is, and I think they're more afraid than we are. And their mass media is worse than ours, if you can imagine that. But in individual countries, citizens should be able to make an impact, particularly if we continue to pretend to be democracies. Okay, so that's how I would answer. It's not a real good answer, but that's the best thing I can come up with. To Helga's suggestion, what can we do now and next besides the conference that's being planned and the one at the National Press Conference as well? People who have appeared on this program, namely Larry Wilkerson and Ted Postal, are on that initial panel at the National Press Club will be in the on the 7th of December. So be aware of that too, you Americans, and to see if we can strum up some interest in it. So thanks for letting me go on here.
Thank you, Ray. Oh, Helga, I see you've unmuted. Please go ahead.
Well, I unfortunately can only agree with you, Ray, that the situation in Germany is worse than in the United States because we are a colony and a lot of people have the mentality of being a colony and not. I mean, it's so bad that now it seems not totally impossible that the vote of no confidence, which Scholz is planning to have, may actually lead to a situation where he's not voted out because more and more parliamentarians realize that Scholz, of all people, may be the last defense of not sending the Taurus missiles to the Ukrainians, which Merz, the chancellor candidate of the CDU, has said many times he would do immediately. So it may be that some of the opposition parties are actually voting for Scholz, as incredible as it may be, because they think that the alternatives are so much worse. But that shows you how far gone the situation is. So I can only say that the more messages are coming from you, meaning the Americans, to the Germans, I can only encourage you. Maybe you want to be on another program with me in the next period, addressing the German situation in particular, because you are American, and that means that people tend to think that you are on the right side, even if you are in opposition to the present policies. So I can only say that we have to really do a miracle because I mean, if it comes to war, Germany would be extinct. I think Ted Postol has made that very clear, and Stephen Starr has also, provided the material. So I think that is the thing we have to really get across to people, because otherwise we may not exist by the time Trump is supposed to come in.
I was just going to ask, I know Diane wanted to say something, but we don't have to go to that. She has to get off at 12:45. She wanted to make a comment. Is that okay at this time? I'm sorry. I guess
Either we
I
can
don't
do
know.
that, or I can go in now and then Diane can comment afterwards, however you want to do it, Anastasia, your call.
Okay. Well, why don't we grab Diane real quick? Diane, do we have you on? Let me find her.
Yeah, she's on.
There we go.
Yes, just made it. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. I just wanted to bring up this cultural question, both from the standpoint of the pamphlet that Helga talked about on the conference, because I think one of the things that, and President Ramatar brought up the situation with the Palestinian people, we are confronted with this unbelievable horror going on of not just Gaza, the West Bank, southern Lebanon. Perhaps the ceasefire might hold a bit as if it's normal, and we're walking into thermonuclear war. And I think it's true that people in the West are equally oblivious to the new paradigm emerging from the BRICS developments as they are to the proximity in which we stand to going over the abyss to nuclear war. And I think it's very important, both the conference and the pamphlet will put these things together, because part of this, we have a really degraded view of man in the West. And what the result, I think, emotionally is a kind of a blah, where you see these atrocities and then people seem to be incapable of responding, or they don't respond with the passion which is required. And perhaps Helga will address this, but I wanted to say personally, I'm extremely excited about the fact that we're going to have this organizing material also as a way to address what people call a migrant crisis, which is not really a migrant crisis, but it is a cultural crisis of what you think it means to be a human being, what you think a nation state is, what you think should be the mission of government, etc. And then the question of the fourth panel coming up on the Schiller Conference Saturday and Sunday on taking this from the standpoint of something universal and beautiful, which can unite us. And finally, I'll just say one of the big challenges we have, Helga mentioned that Germany is acting or thinking as a colony. Well, here in the United States, we seem to have totally lost our identity. We used to be a revolutionary group of people who defeated the British Empire. We had presidents like Kennedy or John Quincy Adams. I think many nations were hopeful when Kennedy was president that they could declare their independence and the US would be a partner. But now our identity is nearly entirely that of the British Empire, the global hegemon. And here we are coming up on our 250th anniversary. So I think that's another big challenge here from our side, is to straighten that out. And I think these cultural questions and the conference and the pamphlet are useful ammunition. So that's what I wanted to add to this discussion.
Thank you. Okay, well, unless there's any more discussion around what we were talking about, we can continue, which is actually a good jumping off point into the next person. But let me just ask if there was anything else that people wanted to contribute to this.
Can I just two quick words?
Go ahead.
One, I would say that that we should put a lot of emphasis on nuclear disarmament. Go back to the whole question of we gotta make our propaganda make people feel personally endangered. I think we have been doing some very, very good work. We have had some very good people on this program before who were very explicit. Maybe we should find out how we can keep that in the center of people's minds, because I think we do it sometime one time and then we don't do it again. But if we can find a way to keep perpetually keeping those things in the front of people, that can probably help us to build back a movement against nuclear weapons and weapons that endanger people. And just, by the way, I would just like to say that in responding to Ray McGovern's position about Putin's position on Trump, I was of the impression that he was trying to help Trump be elected by taking an opposite position, because he knew that if he ever came out openly and said, I would prefer Trump to be elected, then that would have brought down a ton of attacks on Trump from all sides of the American society, and might very well have caused Trump to lose the election. So I think when he was saying, because how could he honestly say that he had preferred Biden to win after all that had happened with Biden and all that Biden was doing? So I believe that that was his way. That was the best way he could have helped Trump to be elected with all Trump's shortcomings. I think he feels that he can probably talk to Trump And he's not even talking to Biden. Lavrov is not even speaking to Blinken. So I think that was probably a strategy to move the attack away from Trump and onto Biden if he could have gotten that done. That's a small piece of contribution.
No, I would say that's quite a tenable view, and a lot of people thought that at the time. Trump himself was reported to have said, I don't know if Putin's done me a favor or done me a disfavor. I don't know how to read this. Well, I mean, I didn't either. I do think that unpredictability is the really bête noire that the Russian leaders fear. And in my view, they have to see Trump as Mr. Unpredictable. So whatever games he was playing, and he played further games, as you know, with respect to endorsing Biden and then endorsing Kamala Harris, tongue in cheek. So, but I take your point, and that's you're probably right. Lots of people would think that's why he did it.
It was certainly pretty funny the way the media flipped out afterwards after he had said that about Kamala Harris. It was quite funny to watch. People couldn't tell a joke, quite frankly, is what I heard.
From that.
But yeah, thank you, President Ramatar, for that. I know just for time reasons, I think we should continue, but I think this was a good discussion, and we can come back during the Q&A period, which we are getting tons of questions coming in. So people are very lively and active. We got about 240 people on the Zoom, and I don't know what the attendance is over the other platforms, but I'm sure it's quite a bit right now. So again, thank you everybody for joining us on this discussion process. So next we're going to go to Dennis Small, who is just coming off of a crash program with our friend Marcia Mary Baker to pull together a pamphlet going into the Schiller conference on the 7th. And let me pull up the name of that pamphlet. Report, Development Drive Means Billions. My computer just jumped. Means billions of new jobs, no refugees, no war. So Dennis Small is going to go through some of this going into the conference on December 7th. So please go ahead, Dennis Small.
Not limited to Marcia and myself by any means. This was a whole transatlantic task force which Helga had convoked for the purpose of pulling this project together on a crash project basis as a discussion document for the kinds of issues that have to be taken up if we are in fact serious about stopping nuclear war and stopping the trajectory towards absolute hell, which is ongoing in many parts of the planet, Gaza certainly being one of them, the refugee crisis being another. Before I say a few words about that pamphlet and show you a few slides, I want to say one or two things about the discussion by way of transition, what we've been talking about here, which is that there has been a pretty definitive response at this point from the West to Putin's initiative around the Oreshnik, as he said, a way of avoiding nuclear war with a weapon that has the effect, not just militarily, strategically, of a nuclear weapon without a nuclear weapon. And the response has been very straightforward. Immediately, more ATACMS launches occurred within a couple of days. The French announced that they had permitted Scalp missiles to be used similarly. The French reinitiated this discussion of sending French troops into Ukraine. Admiral Bauer of NATO, the head of the military committee, said, well, you know, we have to transform ourselves from a defensive organization into an offensive one, meaning NATO. And he then said, what we have to do is, instead of just shooting at the arrows which are launched at us, we have to get rid of the archer. Now, this is a formulation, one sort of like that comes out of ninth grade freshman English writing metaphors that are used. That you can see this throughout the Pentagon and other documents now. Just look it up, archer and arrows, and everyone is talking about this. It's a statement of open warfare. So much so, and I think this in part speaks to what you were asking a moment ago, Helga, about the response in the West being one of complete madness. Well, I can say that Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, responded to Bauer's comments by saying, "This is simply batshit crazy. The United States should pull out of NATO." Now, that's a reasonable comment. And I think we can and should get more of that kind of thing. Then there were, of course, the comments from Admiral Buchanan. What is it about these admirals? I don't know. Buchanan basically discussing, he's the spokesman for STRATCOM, discussing the ways in which the United States could wage nuclear war. Well, if we're going to do it, we do have to be very cautious, you understand. And we have to make sure that after the first series of launches, which everyone launches everything, he says we have enough left over to still inflict damage. This is utterly insane. But there's one other area in which the aggressive response from the West to the peace initiative, which the Oreshnik is, it is that. One other area which I think needs to be mentioned, not just for purposes of completeness, but sometimes by launching attacks, the enemy reveals his own weakness. And the other area is that Wall Street and the City of London have escalated their financial warfare against Russia. One would almost think that it's impossible to escalate beyond the level of sanctions, but they have. They've put every single Russian bank, including Gazprom Bank now, which is the bank that carries out the financial transactions for Gazprom, which is oil and gas. I mean, this is not just the heart of the Russian economy. This is the heart of the European economy. So these are now under sanctions as well, which has opened a period of financial warfare and capital flight against Russia. The other thing that was launched was a statement coming from the Treasury Department that we were not going to allow any settlements agreement by anybody, a cross-border payment settlement agreement. It's not going to happen. We're going to wipe them out. It's kind of an ATACMS of the financial world statement, which has bricks written all over it. But this attack on the ruble is very important because it's plummeted to 110 to the dollar. It's expected to go down further. And this financial warfare has taken advantage of a chink in the Russian armor. That is to say, a weakness, in my view, of the Russian approach on this, which is to permit still free convertibility between the ruble and the dollar, which has created a situation where the central bank has had to either flood the market with dollars to be able to keep up the value of the ruble, or finally they just froze things, which was about time that they did that. It was needed from a ways back. What they had stopped doing, and which is necessary and should be renewed, is to impose circumstances in which 80% of all foreign exchange earnings from Russia are in fact required to be converted back into the ruble, so that those kinds of financial and economic protective measures are needed as well. Now, why do I say that this kind of sometimes an attack from the enemy reveals a weak flank? Well, this is the whole concept of this pamphlet, and in particular the issue of migration, which Helga focused on, as the sharp edge of a way in which we can get beyond dividing the world into conflicting camps, which leads us to an economic blowout and thermonuclear warfare, which is the trajectory we are now on. So let me just do this by showing you some slides with share screen. First, I want to show this one. This is the cover of the pamphlet. Development drive means billions of new jobs, no refugees, no war. And this is a 25-page pamphlet. What you're seeing on the cover there is the port of Chancay, just inaugurated between China and Peru, as an example of the kind of economic development which can eliminate the basis for warfare as well as the refugee problem. Now, let me just jump right into the refugee aspect of this, because, I mean, everyone really needs to read this pamphlet, I got to say, but you can do that. You can download it. Let's talk about the connection between war and refugees. This is a map, official map put out by Frontex, which is the European Union's Agency for Migration. And this shows refugee flows in the year 2022. Now, you can both see where people are coming from and where they're going to and their routes. The single largest number of detentions crossing the border into Europe in 2023 was Syria, over 100,000. Syria, the scene of warfare, as we've just heard again from Colonel Black as to what's going on there. The second biggest country is Guinea in Africa. Africa has been subjected in general to warfare, economic warfare of genocide, destroying their economies and their populations. And the third largest flow comes from Afghanistan. Well, what's going on in Afghanistan? It's a NATO war for decades, which turned the entire country into de facto rubble, which they're trying to recover from now. And there's huge numbers of Afghan migrants as well, forced migration into Europe. And now you can see the roots here. This is what's happened to migration from Europe over the last 3 years. It has grown substantially. These are simply detentions. These are the people they catch at the borders. It's not the people they don't catch, nor the number of people who are already there. But it gives you a measure of the growing problem. And you can see how rapidly this has grown, almost doubled in 2 years. And the main route taken, the big growth, is the red one, Central Mediterranean route, which is what you saw in the map. Now, in addition to war, what causes migration, turning now to the Americas, and this is all documented in the pamphlet, look at what's happened because of economic catastrophe in Mexico and Central America. Why is there such a big problem of migrants? Well, look at the situation with Mexico. 128.5 million population, 11 million first-generation Mexicans are in the United States. That's almost 9% of their population. If you take first and second and third generations, in other words, Mexican Americans, it's almost 30% of the Mexican population that would otherwise have remained in Mexico. Why didn't they stay there? Well, it's very straightforward. You can thank the IMF and Wall Street and the City of London for having intentionally destroyed the Mexican physical economy for the purpose of depopulation and looting the country. And this is just one indication of it. This is very basic food production in Mexico. Physical terms, not dollar terms, measured in physical units per capita. And I indexed each of them to 1981 equals 100, so you could compare corn, wheat, beans, and rice. The only one that has not plummeted since 1981. This is physical production per capita. The only one is corn at 103, although consumption has dropped. If you look at wheat, it's dropped by 39% in this 40-year period. Beans, I mean, did you ever go to a restaurant, a Mexican restaurant, and you didn't get refried beans? It's a 59% collapse. Rice, 81%. I mean, this is what's going on. These economies are being decimated over this period of time. And this should begin to point us to what the answer might be if you actually want to solve the problem, as opposed to yell and scream and say, well, I hate doing immoral things to all of these poor people, but we have no choice, do we? The contrary view of development is that expressed by William Paddock back in the 1970s, a Rockefeller-associated agronomist tied totally to the State Department, who said, we have to shut the border with Mexico and let them scream. This will reduce their population by 1/2, but that's what's needed. Now, there's another approach, and this is what the pamphlet lays out in detail and is the subject of the discussion that will be had on the 7th and 8th. This is a useful map. It's very rudimentary, but it gives an idea of what the world land bridge is and the development corridors that can actually turn around this issue of forced migration, both from Africa and the Middle East and so on into Europe, and from Central America, Mexico, and elsewhere into the United States. The Chancay port, that's number 2, was just inaugurated, China and Peru working together. The route westward to China is now available for shipping. And I'll say something about this now. And this opens up the likelihood that the transcontinental railroad that Helga was mentioning will be built to open up all of South America to economic development. That emphatically includes the Central American region, which is not just a new Panama Canal, which has been widened, but a Nicaraguan sea level canal, because even the new Panama Canal is too small for the kinds of ships that need to sail through it. In addition to that, you build a high-speed rail line through Central America, through Mexico, the United States, up through Canada, Alaska, and crossing through the Bering Strait Tunnel into the Eurasian land bridge networks, and you have the basis for actual economic development. People are not going to want to leave their countries to come to the United States. They're going to want to stay and help develop. And wherever anything like this has been done, you can see the effect immediately. I won't go through the other routes here. We can come back to that later if people are interested. Let me just point to this Chiang to Shanghai route, which I believe I showed last time on the IPC meeting. This is the Great Circle. This is the shortest route as the crow flies. Between Shanghai and Shanghai. It doesn't sort of go immediately west across the ocean. It's a polar route, which is almost entirely over sea, and therefore the new shipping route from Shanghai to Shanghai looks like this, drawn schematically, but it not only, this knocks about 25% off the shipping time of the route from Shanghai to Shanghai, because until now, the port was so small on the west coast of South America that they couldn't handle the largest container ships, which hold 24,000 TEUs of containers. So therefore, they had to go to larger ports, like ship a smaller ship to Long Beach in California, and from there to Shanghai. This all takes 35 days or so. This is now going to take 25 days because you can have a direct ship route of 24,000 TEUs go from Shanghai to Shanghai nonstop. And if you build the transcontinental railroad, you're going to have all of Brazil, which is the major industrial economy of South America, connected through the Pacific Basin to China, as is in the interests of both countries. Now, that's good, but what's really good is what you see in orange, which is the World Land Bridge. What you need and what we have proposed, not every line is drawn here, but is to link by high-speed rail lines, double-tracked high-speed rail lines, and in some cases maglev, all the way from the tip of South America, all the way up through South America, through Central America, up through the Americas, across the Bering Strait Tunnel, and down into the land bridge which now exists, and down to Shanghai. This route, which now takes 25 weeks by sea, with high-speed rail will take about 25 days. Now, I ask you, what is the improvement in productivity if you do something like that? It's not just you have improved time, and it's not just the port in Shanghai, which, by the way, is a smart port. It's completely automated. It's like the Chinese ports that you see. You see all these mechanized cars picking up the TEUs, the containers, moving them around. It's about a 50% increase of productivity of ports that don't have that. So think of the increase of productivity, that is to say, what you can produce physically, economically, with the same amount of labor power, just more skilled, is an enormous difference. And if you have these land corridors, which is what Lyndon LaRouche always described as critical, with 100 kilometers on each side, it's not just a rail line to get from point A to point B, it's development along the way. Maritime routes are great, and they're needed for some things, bulk cargo, things of that sort. But you don't develop, suppose you could if you worked at it, 100 kilometers on each side in the sea as your ship goes through. You run a high-speed rail line, and you're going to get the kind of stuff that you're getting in China right now. The United States must, as must Europe, cooperate with China for the development of the nations of the South. You've got 4.7 billion people already on board. It's going to be many more sooner than later with the BRICS and that BRICS process. The Chinese have said over and over and over again that this is open to the United States, it's open to Europe. And this migrant problem and the drug problem, which is a Wall Street problem, which is piggybacked on these migrant corridors in both Europe and the United States, can be solved with this kind of approach. We simply have to encourage and generate the in-depth thinking on economics that will happen at this conference and the advanced strategic outlook and scientific outlook that was reflected in what Mike Lee said, that this other stuff is batshit crazy. That's it. That's what I wanted to say. My conclusion was on the subject of what's batshit crazy.
Well, thank you. That was definitely well put. Okay. So as I said before, I have included both the link for the pamphlet, and thank you to everybody who worked on it, the whole team from across many different countries who worked on this pamphlet, and also the link to RSVP for the conference in the chat as well. I'll hop on the YouTube and I'll include that there as well. I'm kind of hopping back and forth here. So I think with that, we're going to go to the discussion period. And unless there's anything more to include into this, but I think we'll just jump on to the discussion period now. So